Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And we're off to a stellar start here for the new week. It is Monday, February 16th, 2015. It is President's Day. It's the day when the president comes out of the White House, and if he sees his shadow, we get 6 more months of war, poverty, lies, and so forth and so on here. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, repatching to get the correct bump musics back in, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. All righty, breaking news. This just started coming in just before we went to the show. We're not seeing this yet anywhere on the American, or even for that matter, British media. But we saw the story first in Russia Today's German website that Poroshenko's family has fled Ukraine. They chartered a flight to get his wife and other members of the family out. And we are looking at stories from the Ukrainian media where apparently Poroshenko has been presented an ultimatum by his own military to get this war in the East resolved by the 23rd, or, quote, what happened to Gaddafi will happen to you. We're looking at another article here where apparently there is concern in the junta in Kiev that there is a new Maidan revolution in the offering. And this one, unlike the last one that was a bought and paid for fake, this is a real one where you're going to have literally millions of the Ukrainian people marching on Kiev with tar, feathers, ropes, rails, and whatever else they feel like using because they've hit their breaking point. Apparently the fact that Kiev just violated the Minsk agreement within hours of being signed was the last straw. And we're going to be talking about that in just a little bit. But over the weekend, we had another one of these tailor-made to kick off the entire world atrocities by ISIS or somebody pretending to be ISIS, where apparently 21 Egyptians were beheaded. And these were Egyptian Christians trying to get everybody else going. And this, of course, has drawn Cairo directly into the conflict in Libya. Remember what I told you only a couple of months ago when the Libyan people started taking their country back from the U.S. puppet regime, there'd have to be a second invasion of Libya, and here it is. Oh, no, we're not really invading Libya. We're going after ISIS. ISIS is the new enemy that you all have to hate and fling your children's lives at. And ISIS is in Iraq, and ISIS is in Syria, and ISIS is in Libya, and ISIS is everywhere else we want to invade. And by the way, Fox News had a story earlier today about all the countries around the world where ISIS is known to be active. And boy, what an amazing coincidence. There are all countries that have vast amounts of natural resources that are selling those resources for currencies other than the dollar and refusing to go along with the U.S.-centric financial system. That's what this ISIS is. It's another manufactured fake group for you to all hate and justify invasions of countries that haven't actually done anything to us, because they sort of burned out that, oh, they have weapons of mass destruction, oh, they have sarin gas, oh, they're committing genocide, because they've told us so many lies we just don't believe anything they say anymore, and this is more of the same, and I'm not the only person saying that. Over at Activist Post, they've got a wonderful article, Unlimited War, ISIS PSYOP Theater Comes to Full Fruition, where they're basically validating what we've been saying here on this show. ISIS is a made-up enemy. It's 200 guys in a video production unit to justify open-ended war across the globe for the bankers. All right, getting on back to Russia and actually Ukraine, things seem to be very much in move there. If the Ukrainian people kick Poroshenko and his junta out, and by the way, bringing in Saakashvili was not a good move on Poroshenko's part. But if the Ukrainian people kick out the junta, the rug comes out from under the U.S. attempt to create a confrontation with Russia. So what are we going to do? Oh, ISIS is in Ukraine. We've got to invade Ukraine now. So forth and so on. All right, article out of Global Research. Boy, it didn't take long. Kiev breaches Minsk agreement. We're hearing about the ceasefire, Kiev forces shelling people, and of course the Western media is saying, oh, no, it's the Eastern Ukraine. They violated the ceasefire. Our guys are good. Poroshenko is good. Ukraine is good. Eastern breakaway independent republics are bad. Russia is bad. So the ceasefire did not hold. The egg timer on that one ran out. Everybody's blaming everybody else. But apparently, just by looking at which way the artillery is flying, it's pretty obvious that Kiev kept this thing going. And that was the breaking point. And that's why Poroshenko is basically evacuating his family. Maybe the beginning of a bug out for the entire junta. Now, as you probably know, the IMF, just before the Minsk agreement, extended a $17.5 billion loan to Kiev for Poroshenko to spend and the Ukrainian people to pay back. One of the conditions on that was that large amounts of Ukraine's farmland, which is considered public property, it's not owned by private corporations, but that's now to be put on the block for Western corporations like Monsanto to take over for pennies on the dollar. That was one of the deal. Well, as soon as the $17.5 billion line of credit was extended to Poroshenko, Gazprom knocked on the door and said, hey, you still owe $2.5 billion to us for all this natural gas you've been getting. So the money is going out the door faster than they can bring it on in. And the Ukrainian people understand that they and their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren are all going to be expected to work and sacrifice to pay all this money back. Now, here was an article over at darkmoon.me, and this came out before the news about Poroshenko evacuating his family. Putin smiles as Ukraine unravels. And it's basically saying Putin isn't doing anything. He doesn't have to. Putin has not had to do anything at all but sit back, have a vodka, some piroshki, and just watch with amusement while yet another U.S. coup d'etat overthrow crumbles, which is exactly what's happening right before everybody's eyes. Another article over at Reader Supported News talking about the Putin did it conspiracy theory, and they're basically taking the New York Times to task, saying that they obviously did not learn any lessons from that brouhaha, that prevarication, that mendacity, that equine excrement about Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons. And they're still back to carrying the U.S. government's water to say that this is all somehow Russia and Putin's fault, and no, it is not. And apparently the New York Times is out there going on the attack on anybody who doubts the official story. They're crazy. They're conspiracy wackos. How could they even think that the U.S. government overthrows foreign nations? Ignoring the fact they've done it at least 50 times since the end of World War II. Another article over at RINF.com, evidence about the connection between the Ukrainian coup and Crimea's breakaway, and it's a restatement of the obvious. All of this last year's turmoil in Ukraine goes back to the U.S.-backed coup d'etat that removed Ukraine's elected government for the crime of not wanting to merge with the European Union. And that's what led to Crimea voting independence and then voting to merge with Russia. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm still not seeing anything at all in the American corporate media about Poroshenko's family fleeing Kiev. Thomas in Sweden just notified me. Apparently, Radio Ukraine's website is down. Says server not found. Something very dramatic may be going on over there right now, and we're waiting for more developments and more confirmation. But we got the story about Poroshenko's family leaving Kiev from 3 different sources. 1 in Germany, 2 in Ukraine. And we have been hearing for 2 weeks now that there was a possibility of a military coup against Poroshenko. So, meanwhile, and obviously this came out before the news about Poroshenko's family. Story reported over in Sputnik News. EU to unveil new targeted anti-Russia sanctions on Monday. The thing is, the Ukrainian people are sick and tired of sanctions. They equate the pain they're suffering from the sanctions with Poroshenko, throwing more sanctions on Ukraine right now. or on Russia is going to backflash and just build the anger against the authors of all this upset, which is seen as the United States and Poroshenko. And Poroshenko's within reach, as it were. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that and see what's going on here. But I have a feeling something dramatic is about to happen in Kiev. And it will pull the rug right out from underneath the U.S.-NATO confrontation with Russia and Putin. Story coming out of another story from Russia today. The U.S. is eyeing a new air base in Iraq to carry out the offensive on ISIS. No, it isn't. It's to reinforce U.S. dominance over Iraq and its oil fields. That's what's going on here. This is a new world war, and unlike the previous two, you're not being told who the real enemy is, or the real purpose. Actually, just like the last two. The last two wars were all about banking and merchandising and economies. And they just picked a villain for you. A lot of people think World War I, World War I, bad Germans, bad Germans. World War I actually broke out between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. And the corporate media shifted the focus onto Germany because we had to smash Germany's economic might. They were a threat to Great Britain. They were selling products that were better than the British products. For less money, we can't have that. This war is all about Bretton Woods. It's all about the petrodollar. But the U.S. government understands you're not going to throw away the lives of your children over which particular private central bank's brand of paper and ink everybody has to use. And they can't do any more claims about Saddam's nuclear weapons or Assad's sarin gas or terrorists this or that. They burned it out. They've used it too much. So they've come up with a new manufactured enemy, ISIS. We must fight ISIS wherever they are. And just by coincidence, ISIS is always showing up in the oil nations or nations with natural resources who won't sell them for the U.S. dollar, who won't go along with U.S. business interests. Remember what Obama himself said last week. The U.S. uses its military force to arm twist other countries to do what the U.S. wants them to do. That's the declaration of the American empire right there. All right, so what's the corporate media talking about? Well, they're actually finally acknowledging the reality of the heavy winter intermittently, but the majority of the coverage is going to this terrorist attack that happened in Copenhagen, Denmark, over the weekend. And as terror attack goes, it wasn't really all that effective. Only one person was killed in a city where probably 20 or 30 died in traffic accidents during the same time period. And now they're out there saying that the person who carried out this horrible Charlie Hebdo clone attack was on the security services radar. The guy that they have claimed is the bad guy here. Evil Islamic gunman, and he had a long criminal record, and the security services were watching him, which tells us one more time that all this security nonsense and spying doesn't really work, does it? We have been told that we have to accept NSA spying on our lives, reduced rights, reduced privileges, higher taxes to save us all from terror. And then when push comes to shove, they can't do it, can they? That's if you accept the official story at face value, and I don't. It's another false flag attack to push the anti-Islamic war agenda. I'm not the only person thinking so. Over at Anarfan Blogspot, false flag attack on Copenhagen. And this article points out, Denmark is a client state of the USA. It's one of the provinces. It's basically controlled by several top CIA agents that are over there telling the government what they must do to please their masters in Washington, D.C., who in turn must please their masters in Tel Aviv. Another article from Big Dan Blogger. Did Netanyahu and the Mossad have the arrogance to do an exact duplicate false flag attack like Charlie Hebdo in Copenhagen, Denmark? We've reached a situation where every time there's one of these events, the first assumption in the population is it's another false flag attack. And they sure as heck are in a a problem, that trust and faith in government, that willingness to believe the official story, that's gone. It's absolutely gone. All righty, we're going to take a real quick phone call here. We're going to go to Keith in Montana. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. First of all, I wanted to say I was questioning this so-called alleged bank heist, where we know for a fact that ATMs take photos. And again, as you mentioned earlier, with all this NSA spying and stuff like that, why isn't all the IP addresses, the bank account information, none of this stuff becomes public. It's always just alleged that something happens, and of course, you never hear anything else about it.
Now, you're talking about the hackers supposedly getting $1 billion or something from a large network. Okay, I wasn't sure what the context was. And again, where's the NSA in all this that's watching all of our computer traffic and spying on everybody's computers? Why can they never catch the criminals? And, of course, we know the head of the NSA tried to explain that away by saying, well, it's not our job to go after the bad people. We're only going after terrorists and criminals, who I think they're bad people. They've got this very expensive system set up to watch the net, and yet they can't actually seem to do anything useful with it. Can't find the hackers, can't find the cyber criminals, couldn't prevent Copenhagen. Complete waste of time and money, as well as being unconstitutional. Keith, we got to take a break for commercials. Do not hang up. I'm going to come back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to the phones here, we're getting a report now from Kiev, where the junta has issued an official statement saying that Poroshenko's wife is away from Kiev to visit the troops, to take them washing machines. That's the official story that we're getting from there. And I put it up there, but that sounds kind of a little weird. When was the last time you saw Michelle Obama go into a war zone? All righty, we're going to go to the phones here. We're going to go back to Keith in Montana. Keith, what else did you have?
You always get me laughing and stuff like that. Anyway, top of the news hour, GCN wagging the Nazis again. But the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was like certified checks. In this banking heist, RT's carrying the story right now, but I deposited a check from Citibank, which covered my roofing damage like that. It took a 7-day hold on a certified check, which in turn IRS all. And then we have PayPal, who instantly closes accounts they suspect of transferring funds. And the last thing I wanted to mention there is, isn't it odd, even RT is carrying the story right now about how Libya is going to shut down their oil production, but just as the gas prices in America dropped down below $1.80, something like that here in Montana, that suddenly oil refineries go on strike. Oil-producing areas, they get bombed either by Egypt or something like that, and then, of course, it drives the price right back up. So corporate America always wins.
Yes. That's the way it's said. They bought the government. A lot of people call it the corporatocracy. And there are sociologists who have long been predicting that just as the theocratic state gave away to the nation state, that ultimately the nation state will give away to the corporate state. And we're certainly seeing that in a lot of the conditions in this transatlantic trade treaty, which allows multinational corporations to override the laws in sovereign nations. So they're really pushing for that.
Yeah, and as you mentioned Friday's show there about how Yemen is the other port next to Iran that would close that strait there. And, of course, where's the U.S. the most concerned right now? It's, as you just got done mentioning, it's always where there's oil.
Yes.
Where there's ice, it's always where there's oil. There's nothing else. Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah. I want you and Claire to have a beautiful day. It's beautiful in Montana.
Well, it's a beautiful day here in Hawaii. Thank you very much for the phone call. And we're going to go over to Jim in Kansas. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
A few years ago, I asked you about the economy in Iceland, and you said you were going to call some of your people that you were acquainted with back when you were in the movie day industry.
Yeah.
Okay, have you ever, maybe I missed it, did you ever call any of your acquaintances in Iceland?
They're not in Iceland anymore, but they left about the same time as that whole post banking thing was coming apart. But while they were there, they said it was a great life up there. Obviously during the crash of 2008, a lot of pressure was put on those people, but they're doing fine now. They're reiterating that they're refusing to join the European Union. So we're going to probably have a Maidan protest in Iceland to kick out their government and put in a pro-EU government. But at the moment, things are doing great. They've thrown some more of those crooked bankers in prison, and, things are doing very well there.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. All right, we're getting another story in. This is from fortressblogspot.se, but it is in English. And apparently it's quoting Oleg Sarev as saying deputies are evacuating their families ahead of the upcoming coup in Kiev. It's actually misdated a couple of days into the future, and I'm hoping that's a translation mistake. But apparently things are getting very dynamic over there, if you will. Alrighty. Now, getting on back to the rest of the world here. We're talking about this false flag attack in Copenhagen. They have one dead body that they're trying to wave around as hard as they can to scream ISIS, Islamic terror, blah, 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 blah. And they're acknowledging they know who this guy was. He's got a long criminal record. He was on the radar screens of all the security services, and still they could not stop this guy. All the NSA's horses and all the NSA's men couldn't prevent another false flag terror again. That's because they want these things to happen. They want them to happen for political gain. It's how they scare you into obedience, how they scare you into surrendering the lives and health of your children for wars of conquest. And Netanyahu is pushing another agenda. Just like he did right after Charlie Hebdo, Netanyahu's come on out and saying, see, Copenhagen proves Jews are not safe in Europe. You should immediately emigrate to Israel. And we know that Israel loves to welcome Jews from other countries who are immediately relegated to the lower levels of their economy. Because every time they tear down another Palestinian home or take over another Palestinian farm, they need cheap workers. And that's why they're doing this whole thing. Now, we did a re-link to an article that appeared a while back over in veteranstoday.com where Israel has a prior documented record of false flag attacks against Jewish people to scare them into leaving their homes and going to Israel. And that includes, apparently there were some bombings in Iraq that were being blamed on, those evil Muslims, you're in danger there, you must come to Israel to be safe. And they're basically being used for the cheap labor. And as a matter of fact, this article points out that Israel arranged things so that when these Jewish people in other countries fled those countries to come to the imagined safety of Israel, they had to leave their property and possessions behind, putting them into an economically weak situation where they could be exploited for cheap labor on the newly liberated Palestinian farmlands. Now, last week we were talking about this so-called anti-Semitic act where 20 cars were sprayed with the French word for Jew. And this was being bandied about in the media. See, anti-Semitism is on the rise in Europe. You're in danger. You've got to move to Israel. We've got to have special laws to protect the Jewish people. And then the police caught the guy, who turned out to be a 73-year-old Jewish man who was out there trying to prove there was anti-Semitism by committing anti-Semitic acts. And we have seen this so many times before. The professor out at Claremont College was spray painting swastikas on her own car. Student at Georgetown was caught on the security camera, pasting a swastika on their door. And by the way, that's a dead giveaway. When they're using the swastika, it's usually a hoax, because nobody except Israel cares about the swastika anymore. That's all from before we were born. Anyway, so today we're getting another story about 400 Jewish gravestones decorated with Nazi graffiti in a French cemetery. And the presumption here is it's another propaganda hoax to prove the world is anti-Semitic, to scare the European Jews into emigrating to Israel, to get special laws, special treatment, special funding from government. See, if you don't give us all of this Department of Homeland Security funding for our schools and synagogues, then you're just being an anti-Semite. constant situation. Now, over in Washington, D.C., the brouhaha over Netanyahu's scheduled March 3rd speech continues. John Boehner is now in the position of having to explain why he violated the Logan Act to invite a foreign head of state to address a joint session of Congress, something that is normally the jurisdiction of the State Department and the executive branch. And Boehner's excuse is that he didn't tell the White House about inviting Netanyahu because he knew Obama was going to interfere. Well, John, that's the president's prerogative to decide foreign policy of this nation. And somebody needs to arrest Boehner, give him that little perp walk out of the Congress, and charge him under the Logan Act. Because what he did is illegal. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the rift that has been created by Boehner going around the executive branch to invite Netanyahu to address a joint session of Congress. As of right now, it is apparently going to be closed door for here in the United States. It's going to be telecast to Israel, but with a 5-minute delay to make sure that Netanyahu's partisan comments can be edited out. This was just declared by Israel's elections commissioner. Meanwhile, Rand Paul is out there on his website saying that he is proud to sign a resolution welcoming Israeli PM Netanyahu to Congress. And he's not only signed Cornyn's letter, he's one of 50 co-sponsors of the bill, Resolution 76, saying, "Welcome, Bibi, we kiss your feet and bow before you." I got to tell you, if I were Dr. Ron Paul, right about now, I'd be having a really long, serious talk with Mrs. Paul, because it just doesn't seem like there's all that much connection between the father and the son. And I know a lot of people are very critical of Ron Paul for not coming out more about the dramatic difference in belief systems. But we just need to point it out here, because Rand Paul is running on his father's name. And that only works as long as people think he is his father. And he clearly is not. He clearly is not. He's almost virtually the opposite of him. Another story out of Jahane's 6-word press, State of the Nation, Historic U.S.-Israel Rift. And they're talking about the fact that following this announcement about the speech, the Obama administration declassified a document confirming that Israel was developing hydrogen bombs with U.S. assistance back in the 1980s. So this is the U.S. government officially confirming that Israel is a nuclear power. They have been for decades. The U.S. government has known it and has continued to take money away from you and give it to Israel in violation of the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act, both of which make it illegal for the U.S. government to send your money to Israel unless there's a waiver provision in there, but the waivers have to be public. The president has to get up there and say, yes, I know Israel has nuclear weapons, but we're still going to take money from you and give it to them, just because. And at this point, I think Helen Thomas is owed an apology by the Obama administration. It'll be a cold day in the dark regions before she gets it. But there's no question she's owed it. Because remember, Obama's first press conference as president, Helen Thomas asked him point blank, what nations in the Middle East have nuclear weapons right now? And Obama didn't answer it. He put on his tap shoes and he tap-danced away and said, well, we view nuclear proliferation with a great deal of seriousness. And the next day, Helen Thomas, long a permanent fixture of the White House press corps, was gone. This is a wronged woman. Wronged by the president. He owes her an apology. She won't get it, but we know that she deserves it. All right. Now, another one of the leaks coming out of Edward Snowden is saying something that we've known all along. Israel is the leading espionage threat against the United States of America, and according to the Snowden leak, that was the NSA's conclusion as well. Remember we were talking about the Israeli spy scandal that happened right about 9/11? The dancing Israelis, the art dealers, the Zoom copter people. For those of you who are a little late to joining our Rivero's Rangers, just before 9/11 happened, the FBI stumbled over the largest foreign spy ring ever found in U.S. history. being operated by Israel. And in Carl Cameron's 4-part news story on Fox News, he quoted a U.S. government official saying that there was, in fact, evidence that linked these Israeli spies to 9/11, but that evidence was classified by the United States government. Israel is not our best friend. They steal all of our secrets, and they do bad things with them. And as a matter of fact, over at Vox.com, they have a story that U.S. officials think that Benjamin Netanyahu has deliberately allowed the secret details of the P5+1 negotiations with Iran to be published in the Israeli press, trying to derail the negotiations. Now, first of all, Israel isn't part of the P5+1, so how are they getting this information to begin with? And second, once they have that information, they're using it to subvert U.S. policy to their own interests, leading to war, possibly a nuclear war. In response to this scandal, U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice has now blocked any further sharing of information with Israel regarding the P5+1 because of what Netanyahu's been doing. They shouldn't have been briefing Israel on that anyway. Israel has too much access to our government, too much control. And they're losing it, which is why they're now moving up to Canada, to make Canada their new puppet regime, especially at the United Nations. Canada has formally opposed Palestinian attempts to join 15 different United Nations treaties and conventions. Because, according to Israel, Palestine doesn't really exist. And they are opposed to anything which seems to grant the Palestinian government any kind of legitimacy anywhere in the world, forgetting that the United Nations General Assembly has already voted to recognize Palestine as its own sovereign state. And now they've got Canada in their pocket, the same way they've had the United States. The Canadian people think Palestine ought to join those treaties and conventions. But the Canadian government's attitude is, we don't care what you think. Israel has told us it must be so, and so it shall be. Mahi dictum est. Interesting little story out of Investment Watch blog. People lose trust in EU governments. And they're talking about the city-state elections that just took place in Hamburg, Germany, where the anti-austerity, anti-banker party pulled an upset victory, and Merkel's party scored only 16% of the vote. So now Merkel knows she's in trouble. It isn't just Spain and Italy that are dealing with the rise of anti-banker, anti-austerity political movements. Now there's one that's gaining ground in Germany itself. Bankers are in a panic right now to try and find some way to get us back into their servitude and their slavery. All right, here's an interesting little article over in geopoliticalmonitor.com. Yemen, the world's newest failed state. And they're saying basically Yemen has broken down to anarchy. It doesn't have a government or a president. And we know what's going to happen next. Ooh, ISIS is in Yemen. We, the United States, must invade and attack and put in a new puppet ruler to replace the last U.S. puppet ruler that the Yemenite people kicked out. Now, the UN Security Council has issued a resolution demanding the people of Yemen relinquish control of the government, specifically the Houthis, and end the violence and open the doors to a new government that is in line with the New World Order and Agenda 21 and so forth. Now, last week we were talking about the government of Venezuela had thwarted a plot by the United States involving very gigantic bribes to top Venezuelan Air Force officials to bomb the presidential palace. Nothing new there. The U.S. has been pulling coups and attempted coups in Venezuela for decades now. But apparently, as they further investigate this, Britain and Canada were part of this as well, What is Venezuela's crime? They want to be independent of the rest of the world's major powers. They want to go their own way, decide what they're going to sell their oil for, how best to take care of their people, and not let their country fall back into the hands of the money junkies. And that cannot be allowed to stand. The world belongs to the money junkies, and anybody who disagrees is a terror suspect to be made war on. So, wrong side of history. We're coming up here on our news break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the economy, talking about Iceland saying they will not join the European Union. They've seen what a raw deal it was for everybody who was out there. We'll be back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. All righty, now getting on to the economy. As I mentioned to that caller earlier in the program, Iceland has reiterated that they will not be joining the European Union. Now, back in 2010, the European Union was trying to lure Iceland in because Iceland's economy had been shattered by the mortgage-backed security fraud on Wall Street in 2008, and they were in desperate trouble. And the EU said, come on into our warm embrace. We will loan you all kinds of money, with strings attached to it, of course. And Iceland began to really cool on the idea, especially after the current government was voted in 2013. Because they campaigned on an anti-European Union platform. And so I imagine that probably just like they did in Kiev a year ago, a little over a year ago, they're planning a color revolution in Iceland to get rid of that troublesome government that refuses to merge with the New World Order and put in a new junta. That will get those gosh darned Icelandic people properly enslaved to the private central banks. Over in Greece, things are not going very well, depending upon your point of view. The people of Greece seems to think they're going in a good direction, the EU not so much. Now, Greece's banks are being hammered by international pressure to try and motivate them to come to some kind of an agreement with the European Union. And Greece's position is, yeah, we're interested in negotiating the loans, but without any conditions on them. Because the conditions inevitably come down to, you will go back to the agreements you had before. And Greece, Syriza, is adamant on that. By the way, somebody just sent me these photos from a street carnival in Germany, and they've become famous around the world for the very provocative, politically themed floats that they have in these parades. And this float, I'm going to post the picture in the letter section here soon, is a float with Angela Merkel as a cyclops and a little tiny Tsipras with a slingshot just fending her off here. Now, over in the EU, this is being reported in Investment Watch blog, EU official says Greece situation extremely difficult. He's got a magnificent grasp of the obvious. They're trying a last-ditch effort to try and come to some kind of an agreement where Greece will come back in, or will remain in the European Union, remain enslaved to the ECB, and go on paying off all of that debt on the schedule the ECB says they should. In other words, bring back austerity. And, of course, Tsipras can't do that without destroying his own credibility with the voters. He'll be out next election. And somebody else who's anti-austerity, anti-banker will be in. Now, latest word we're getting from Zero Hedge is that the Eurogroup meeting is over. The talks broke down, and it all came down basically to Greece saying, we will not take orders from the European Union on the bailout. And the European Union puffed itself up in its greatest dignity and extended the ultimatum deadline by another 40%. The EU's in a very, very difficult situation. They can't cut Greece any slack, or every other nation in the European Union is going to want exactly the same. But this hardline approach risks driving Greece out of the EU, defaulting on its debt, especially the odious portion, and strengthening their ties with Russia. Russia's got the red carpet out there. Going to end the food import ban going to loan Greece money without all the strings attached to it. Same thing Russia was doing to Ukraine. They're simply making better offers than the U.S. and the EU is. So, meanwhile, over in Russia, almost 91 domestic credit institutions have already been incorporated into the new Russian financial system. They're setting up their own version of SWIFT, an international electronic banking network. And it will allow Russian banks to communicate seamlessly through the Central Bank of Russia. And this was all started by U.S. threats to kick Russia out of SWIFT, and that will teach them. And they thought it would bring Russia back to the U.S. doorstep on their knees saying, please don't cut us out from SWIFT, we'll do what you tell us. Didn't work, backfired. Now there's an alternative to SWIFT. And a lot of other countries around the world are going to say, with the U.S. weaponizing SWIFT and using it to bludgeon and arm twist our obedience and complacency, maybe we ought to go with this alternative. Now, over in California, they're having what they call a working strike, where the dock workers are still on the docks, and they're still punching the clock, but they're intentionally slowing things down. And the slowdown has been already more than half of the throughput. And we're hearing all these stories from places like governmentslaves.info. The port closures and slowdowns are hitting a lot of American industries hard. And we are already seeing the effects here in Hawaii. There are certain things that come from the United States that just aren't on the store shelves anymore. Story out of governmentslaves.info. 32 massive cargo ships are stuck in the Pacific as port shutdown continues. We have a few of them anchored off the coast here of Oahu, which I guess if you don't have any work to do and you've got to be stuck someplace, Hawaii's a good place to do that. But apparently over in China, their shipping industry, Costco, is starting to decommission 8 cargo ships, dismantling them, recycling the metal, recycling the equipment, including 3 of their bulk carriers. And, of course, the Baltic Dry Index is not showing any signs of starting up. Why? Well, people don't have money to buy things at the store. The stores don't have a reason to order anything from the manufacturers. The manufacturers don't have reasons to order raw materials. And everybody is letting people go. The economy is shutting down because those vampires up there at the top of the financial pyramid are still sucking away for that last drop of the lifeblood of the nation, that last penny to feed their greed, their addiction. And none of them want to acknowledge the fact that that's really what's killing the entire economy. They're literally killing the goose that laid all those golden eggs they've got. Story out of Government Slaves again. Nation's largest Christian bookstore and gift chain files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Britain's biggest retailer, Tesco, is cutting 10,000 jobs. Why can't these money junkies and these governments look at what's going on and understand why we're in this mess and why the continuation of the current policies is not going to change anything? Now, you've probably heard it on the corporate media. It's getting a lot of coverage here where Democrats in Congress are now demanding that their boy, Barack Obama, cut some slack on Americans who are now facing IRS penalties for failing to have Obamacare-compliant health insurance coverage. It's estimated that there are some 4 million Americans looking at some very hefty IRS fines. And I mean, here's the situation. You've got people who, because of the sky-high cost of these policies, simply can't afford to buy them. And now the IRS is going to fine them more money for not having the money to afford the health insurance policies. We don't like to have health insurance. And this kind of approach to coercing us to buy a product that is really hideously expensive and not very good betrays that belief inside Washington, D.C., that the American people still have all kinds of money. They just got to come up with a reason to take it. And that is the biggest delusion they're operating under and why the system is headed for a breakdown. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we have been talking for many weeks about the abuses of the civil forfeiture laws. Now, these laws were originally created to allow the government to take away the wealth of criminals, specifically drug criminals. And the police departments immediately saw them as a way to acquire wealth without having to actually arrest anybody by their little margarita machines. And it's gotten completely out of control. And so I'm looking at this story over at jalopnik.com, which is a website for people who like older classic vehicles. And they're talking about this series of raids. And this actually happened last summer, but it's coming up here. Apparently, U.S. government officials across the entire country confiscated 40 Land Rovers under the civil forfeiture laws. All of them were older vehicles. They were the Defender models. And they'd all originated outside the United States, and they were imported here in the last few years. Now, apparently, they were imported in a way that violates America's strict car import laws, because since the United States can't actually make a car that can compete in an open market with what's coming out of other countries, there are laws to make sure that you're not allowed to buy those superior, less expensive vehicles. And there are laws that basically say you can't go to another country on your own, buy a car, and bring it back to the U.S. unless you're a recognized licensed dealership that is importing only the allowed vehicles into this country. And the stink about this case is that all of these Land Rovers were like 26 years old, and they were in bad condition. And the authorities who were seizing these things were making absurd statements like, well, you faked the rust to hide the fact that this is a newer vehicle. And it's out of control. First of all, these vehicles are so old, they're worthless. Okay? And certainly these vehicles are not a threat to car dealerships. And yet still, the federal government is out there just grabbing these things on the basis of some obscure import law. It's amazing here. Now, down in Arizona, they have a new governor, Doug Ducey, or Ducey, I'm not sure what it is. And he rode the GOP tide in on the last election. And he's out there taking a position that the state of Arizona doesn't have any money for public education, which is weird because I thought they were doing very well on that situation. But basically he's going ahead with using taxpayer funds to help construct a private prison. So the money is not going to schools to educate the Arizona children so they can find decent jobs and stay out of crime. The money is going into helping a private prison corporation build a new slave labor factory. It's a little weird, if you ask me. Okay. Here's a bizarre story from Alaska. Up in Anchorage, in the assembly chambers, they've just gone through a renovation that involved bullet-resistant upgrades, panels to shield members of the Anchorage Assembly and city officials at meetings. My first thought was, it's hunting season and Sarah Palin was never that good a shot. But apparently, even in Anchorage, they're getting very, very concerned that the decisions they're making on behalf of the people of Alaska aren't much liked by the people of Alaska. And believe me, those people up in Alaska, they all have guns, and they're all crack shots. So it tells us that the Assembly and officials in Anchorage know they're about to embark on some policies that people aren't going to like anymore. Now, as you know, in the Congress, there is a stall, or a stalemate, if you will, regarding the new budget for the Department of Homeland Security. And at issue is the defunding of Obama's amnesty program. which has become a major headache for everybody, and House Speaker John Boehner is out there saying that if we don't pass this bill and get this money there, the Department of Homeland Security could be shut down by the end of the month. Well, I don't know about you, but I think that's a good thing. I could stand to travel without having my crotch groped or my skin irradiated with cancer-causing radiation. And TSA still owes me a laptop from Seattle. Except for the people actually working for the Department of Homeland Security, I can't think of anybody who would view a shutdown negatively. They haven't caught any terrorists. It's another huge, gigantic waste of money. They certainly didn't help the situation in Boston, if you believe the official story. Didn't help the situation in Sandy Hook, if you believe the official story. What good are they? Except to destroy our tourism industry, which really has hit us hard here in Hawaii. All right, so let's talk about computers now. Continues to be an issue with that. Story out of ZDNet hitting home the point that 1 billion data records were stolen last year due to poor security. And that is a 49% increase in data breaches and a 78% rise in data theft. Where's the NSA on all of this? Aren't they supposed to have the entire Internet and all of our computers under their observation? Or are they the ones engaging in the data theft to make a little cash on the side? It's one or the other, because you cannot reconcile this multi-trillion-dollar global surveillance system with its violations of the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and the Ninth Amendment and the Tenth Amendment, with the fact that they don't seem to actually be able to do anything useful at all in terms of we the people. And I know the head of the NSA is trying to explain that away by saying, well, we're only looking at interesting people. It's not our job to find the bad people. Okay, whose job is it? And, of course, we know that Obama loves all this constant break-in stuff because it's leading to his new cybersecurity initiative. So maybe it is the NSA doing all these data breaches. So that Obama can say, see all the data breaches, you got to go with my cybersecurity program. Because that's how this government operates. They'll create a problem and then offer to sell you a solution in exchange for your money and your obedience. And when we come back from this commercial break, I will reprise a story from back in the days of the Exxon Amendment and porn on the Internet being a government false flag operation. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I want to share a story with you about how the government gets you to go along with what they want you to go along with. And this is all the way back in 1995. Before web browsers, HTML, the Internet was still very much in its infancy, but a lot of people were plugged into it. And the government was already getting worried about it. Now, back then, there were basically 3 capabilities on the Internet that you used to get things done. One was FTP, File Transfer Protocol, to move files from one computer to the other. Yes, there was email. And the third was called Usenet. And Usenet was a newsgroup posting system, where you could go into a news group like Food Cooking Recipes Ancient, and you could post an article about this Roman recipe for fish that you had discovered in a book, and everybody who was subscribed to that news group would then be able to read that. Now, Usenet got used for a lot of things, including online pornography, but there was a separate, distinct section for that. It was called the alt hierarchy for alternative. And everybody stayed in their own groups and everybody was happy. And then all of a sudden in 1995, we started seeing porn flood all over Usenet into completely inappropriate groups. And because we were self-policing, we would reply to the poster and say, look, this belongs over in alt hamsters duct tape furry. And they would come back saying, I have a First Amendment right to post this wherever I want. And they made such a nuisance of themselves, we started tracking the IPs, and we found that they all were coming from government and military servers. And sure enough, Congress started debating the Communications Decency Act of 1995, and in particular an amendment called the Exxon Amendment, which said the government must control the Internet to stop the scourge of pornography. And Senator Exxon got up there with his famous blue book, little 3-ring binder showing exactly the same porn images that were being flooded all over Usenet, and coming from these government and military servers. And then the debate was over, the bill was voted on, and like a switch, the porn flood turned off. And so that's how the government gets you to go along with their agenda. They're going to create a crisis. Oh my goodness, banks are being broken into by evil hackers. Data is being looted, it's being stolen, it's completely out of control. We must have more cybersecurity. The government must control the Internet. And this is just more of the same stuff. Because they're caught in a little bit of a logic flaw. Because you cannot have all of this hacking activity, cybercrime going on, and the NSA not doing anything about it unless all the hacking and the cybercrime is being done by the government to get you to give up your rights to privacy and control on the Internet. This is definitely what they're doing. They've played the same dirty trick so many times before. Story out of the Star, up in Canada, Ottawa keeping secret details of secret terror watch with Five Eyes allies. And they're basically taking this idea that, we're doing this for your good. Really, you just have to trust us here. Now, for those of you who don't understand the Five Eyes allies, that goes all the way back to the 1980s in a program called Echelon between the United States, Great Britain, New Zealand, Canada, Australia. And they set up a global network that could intercept satellite communication, landline communication. And back then, all of these nations had laws saying you may not spy on your own citizens unless you have evidence of a crime. Their equivalent of the Fourth Amendment. So what the Five Eyes program did was very simple. The Americans would spy on the British subjects, and the Brits would spy on the Americans, which is perfectly legal. Then they would just trade the data. So they could say, we're not actually violating any laws. They were just evading them. And the present-day NSA spy system is just the outgrowth of Echelon. And they don't want you to know about it. Because if you know about it, you start taking steps to protect your own data, don't you? And it doesn't mean we're engaged in anything illegal, but we already know from past experience that these U.S. government agents that have the back doors to all of your computers will help themselves to your business secrets to give to cronies, to go do stock trades with. It's open season on law-abiding American citizens by the NSA. These are all crimes they're committing. It's called insider trading. During the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference we had in Seattle, back when we were still living up there, we're talking 15, 20 years ago, it was a huge scandal because these U.S. government intelligence agents on the taxpayer dollar were caught breaking into computers of conference attendees to find out business secrets, how much they were bidding on a certain contract, and giving that information to Clinton cronies, who could then come into the meetings and underbid the competition by just a little tiny bit to win the contract. It's called industrial espionage. That's a crime. So yeah, the NSA are a bunch of criminals. They will not comply with the laws. They will not comply with the constitutions. And so it's not that much of a reach to be thinking that this epidemic of cybercrime and hacking that we are all having to endure is in fact another government covert operation to just get us to go along to President Obama and say, please bring about cybersecurity, take control of the Internet, take control of my computer, save me from the imaginary bad people. Seeing a lot of articles out there saying that the so-called net neutrality debate is not at all about net neutrality. It's about getting you to go along with more control over the Internet and especially the independent media. They want to license radio shows like this, websites like mine, the way they license radio and TV, which means you will do what the government tells you to do or you will be denied a license. No more freedom of speech, no more First Amendment. Article out of RINF.com saying ultimately in the long run you can't control the Internet. And GCHQ needs to grow up and accept it. The genie is out of the bottle. More and more traffic is going over to the dark net. And yes, there's a lot of criminal activity going on over there as well. But let's not wreck things for the law-abiding citizen in our haste to get the bad guys. That was the thinking of the Exxon Amendment and the Telecommunications Decency Act of 1995. In the long run, they wound up shutting down Usenet to stop the scourge of porn. And what they were trying to shut down were the political forums where we were sharing information about things like Vince Foster. And Usenet is now gone. It's not allowed anymore. No matter how useful it is, if it challenges the government's power and authority, it cannot be allowed to survive in the United States of America. Now, another story, this is from the Independent in UK. There's a new privacy watchdog who's launched a program, Did GCHQ Spy on You? And they're trying this, basically they're setting up a system that will allow citizens to find out if the government has had them under surveillance. Now, I don't know what their legal recourse is here in the United States of America. If you can get proof the government is spying on you and you are not guilty of any crime, you should be able to take them to court. And remember that embarrassment last week where this judge threw out the Electronic Frontier Foundation lawsuit against NSA, saying that they didn't have standing until they could prove that the NSA had spied on them personally. And, of course, you can't find that out because that would violate national security. I guess they got something embarrassing on that judge. We'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get back to the world of computers and spying and dirty tricks by a government that doesn't know any other way to survive here, we're seeing a report that just came out in the Telegraph in Britain. The Greek crisis talks collapse in acrimony. And apparently the Greek finance minister came out and said the only way to solve Greece is to treat us like equals, not a debt colony. And, of course, from the point of view of the European Central Bank, we're all supposed to be a debt colony. That's the whole reason for private central banking, to trap people and nations in permanently unpayable debt. That's what it does. The people of Greece have woken up to that. People of the world are waking up to that. Now, getting on back to the world of computers and spies and dictatorship, as I mentioned before, the government is desperate to find some way to shut down the alternative media, the independent media. We're not alternative anymore. We're mainstream. We've got the lion's share of the audience right now, and they don't know what to do about it. And they're using every dirty trick they can. And I'm looking at this story that came in from INFOWARS.com because Alex produced this documentary called Endgame, and it talks about this attempt to bring about a New World Order dictatorship under a global private central bank. It's had more than 4 million views on this documentary, and YouTube just took it down because they received a copyright complaint from a bot account in Canada known as E1. Now, here's the problem with YouTube's copyright policy. Anybody can file a copyright claim saying this video violates my copyright, and YouTube does not ask for confirmation. YouTube does not check to see if the copyright claim is legitimate or not, or is simply coming from somebody who's trying to shut down things that the government of any country doesn't want you to see. And apparently last week another video was removed with a copyright claim for a still frame from a BBC News report. Now, I don't know what the laws are in Canada or where YouTube lives, but here in the United States of America, there is a provision in the copyright law called fair use, where you can use a copywritten photo or excerpt from an article or a little snippet in order to make a point or to illustrate something. For example, if I am writing an article saying this photograph of Vince Foster's hand and the gun is a fake because, under the fair use doctrine, I have a right to show the photo so that people can see what I'm talking about. Fair use is what allows schools to have their students go out and grab material to put their reports together with. Fair use is what allows one media outlet to criticize the claims of another media outlet. And yes, they're trying to figure out some way they can shut off fair use so that even school children doing a book report are going to have to pay residuals and licensing fees for the content. But they're clearly desperate to find some way to reverse the trend. And you know something that's not going to work? It's not like, if the independent media were to vanish tomorrow, does anybody really think the American people are just going to say, oh well, shrug their shoulders and go back to believing whatever corporate media tells them? That's not going to happen. You can take decades, you can take a century winning the trust and faith of your people. And it can be gone in a heartbeat with one stupid, clumsy lie, Saddam's nuclear weapons. People instinctively want the truth. They're going to go where they think they need to go to get that truth, to find out what's going on. Over in the former Soviet Union, they didn't have an internet. They did it with fax machines. It was a network called the Samizdat, where people had a fax machine in their office, and they would have a list of 20 numbers pre-programmed in there. They'd write an article, they'd put it in there, it would go out to those 20 machines where it would be forwarded to another 20 each, and it would just connect all over the former Soviet Union. And it was through the Samizdat that the citizens of the Soviet Union began to learn just how badly their government was lying to them to get their money and their obedience and their children for wars. I smell panic on Wall Street and Washington, D.C. Now, here's an interesting little story down in Activist Post. Apparently, there is a proposed legislation in Tennessee that is taking on the NSA by making it illegal for any state resources and material support to be used by any federal agency engaged in warrantless surveillance of the American people in violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. We're seeing a lot of states starting to go along this way. In fact, I think there's already over 200 federal nullification bills in the various state legislatures. It's working out to like 4 per state. So we have Obama out there talking about he wants a new cybersecurity threat center. It's being hailed as a new and unprecedented development in the war against the evil ones. And it isn't. They've had these facilities all along, whether it's called the fusion centers or the MIAC centers or the NSA itself. It's nothing new and different. The NSA has all the capabilities necessary to be finding the hackers and the cyber criminals. What Obama wants is a new agency under his control where they can go out and create mischief and mayhem for people who are saying things the White House doesn't want you to know about here. Now, it's kind of a little bit of a footnote, and this is something we've talked about before. Historians are starting to become concerned about a digital dark age in our history, because starting about 30, 40 years ago, the vast majority of our records became computerized, and computer media doesn't really have that much of a lifespan. I used to have boxes and boxes of 9-track tapes of data. Tape is only good for 5 years, and I don't even know anybody who's got a 9-track anymore. Nobody has those little 3.5-inch floppy drives anymore, let alone the 5-inch. CD is now starting to fade away in favor of direct digital download from the cloud. You can go to some parts of the Middle East, pick up a clay tablet, and read a Sumerian beer recipe from 5,000 years ago. And the vast majority of our day-to-day records of our lives that historians use, they're fading away. They're self-destructing. We did a big story about CD-ROM. When it first came out, it was being sold to us as, permanent backup, will last a life, same life as a regular laser cut CD. And then we discovered the cheaper brands were losing their data after only 2.5, 3 years. Maybe that's what Lois Lerner was saving all that information on, those cheap bargain brand CD-ROMs or something. But it is an issue, because the only records we're leaving to the future are those carved in stone by the money junkies and the warmongers. And that's not going to convey an accurate picture of this time to the future. The future's going to look back and say, well, I guess everybody was just perfectly happy going along with World War III, and it isn't a shame that they almost wiped out the human race in a nuclear holocaust. But we know from current archaeology that the messages and records left by the ruling elite don't actually tell an accurate story about what life was like in their countries, in their times. And it really would be nice to have something available, even at the consumer level, that really was permanent to leave to your children, that was going to be understandable by future technology. That's a big problem. Standards keep changing. Hardware keeps changing. It's like the 9-track tapes. Even if I still had them, how would I read them? What format are they in? Nobody's keeping track of that. And it is a big problem. All right, we're coming up on our top of the hour news break. When we come on back, more science, health news. Please join us on the phones, 877-300-7645, and we will be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3 here. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. We've got a caller waiting. I'm going to get to you in just a minute. But I wanted to basically follow up on this push for cybersecurity. Apparently, Saturday, Obama, not content to wait for Congress to pass the CISPA bill, signed an executive order basically declaring we will now be cyber secure. And like so many of his other executive orders, it's just flowery language and no idea of implementation. And again, it is an unconstitutional exceeding of his authority. Technically, executive orders are only valid against the federal government itself. You are not bound by them. And I wish Congress had the spine to stand up to Obama and say, look, you're not supposed to write the laws of the land from your desk, but they're too busy sucking up to Israel to be doing their constitutional duty. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. James in South Carolina. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yep. I got a question. I've only heard one person in the Truth movement ever mention that, Eustace Mullins. And do you know anything about Ezra Pound and his relationship to the New World Order, and was that what got him into so much trouble? Do you know anything about it at all?
I know of Ezra, and I know that there was some kind of a conflict, but obviously the New World Order is looking at capture and ownership of the entire planet, and for that kind of wealth and power, they're not going to play fair. They're not going to play by the rules. It's very much of anything that gets us what we want is blessed by the imaginary playmate in the sky. And I know from personal experience that when you're out there trying to tell the truth to a government that exists on lies, fraud, and deception, that bad things will happen to you.
Okay, well, he was put in a mental hospital after World War II, and they all said he was fascist and made fascist rants. What little I know of, he talked about the usurers, and it was a fight. World War II was a fight between the usurers and the average person and all like that. But I've looked for more, but I can't find it.
Well, that's certainly consistent with the analysis that we're seeing come out here today. Putting people in a mental home to discredit them was a tactic not only used by the United States but by the Soviet Union. They did it to James Forrestal. And they've done it to a lot of people. Oh, this person's crazy. See, he's in a mental home. You don't want to listen to what he has to say. And, they haven't done it to me yet, but I don't think they can lock me up. But if I was already in, I'd have a heck of a time trying to get out.
Okay. I got another tough one. You want to try it?
All right, sure. Why not?
Okay. When I'm about your age, and years ago.
You have my deepest sympathies.
Well, it gets worse every day, I tell you. When I was in college taking sociology courses, there were two books that were very popular reads at the time. and one of them was The Power Elite by C. Wright Mills, and the other one was The Lonely Crowd by David Reisman. Now, you never hear these books spoken of at all, especially you would think that people would talk about The Power Elite in the Patriot Movement, Truth Movement, whatever, but I never hear anybody talk about them.
Well, we've changed the terminology. I mean, you know, today we call them money junkies or the New World Orderists. But it's basically the same people who think that all humanity exists to make them personally wealthy and powerful, and every age is cursed with them. They just change the names. But there's absolutely no question that these people work to conceal themselves and their activities from the general public. And I was pointing out the other day when Forbes came out with its list of the richest people, and Bill Gates is up at the top, and that's complete and utter nonsense, because Bill Gates' fortune, as large as it is pocket change compared to these families that own all these private central banks. But they don't want you to know they're there. They're trying to keep their true lifestyles hidden from you. And if you go into Google and you type in Rothschild estates in images, you will see these palaces they're living in all over Europe. And, you know, it costs a lot of money to heat those piles of rock. But they don't want you to know that they're there, because they're afraid that if there's a revolution, you know, their necks will be on the guillotine along with everybody else. But now we do know about it. We know the money junkies are there. We know the money junkies are the real power behind our so-called civilian government. And we know that inherently money junkies are always fascist, because if you're not fascist, you don't wind up being a money junkie. But they don't want you to know that they're there, so that if things do get out of control, our anger stops with the public face of the government, which are these elected actors.
Okay. That's all, Michael. Thank you. Keep it up.
All right. You got it. And we are going to switch over here to Bernard in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hi. Just when you were talking about money and banking, and I'm fortunate to live in a house where they listened to your program and heard about the court case in Canada about the Bank of Canada, which of course most Canadians have no idea. I would refer Canadians particularly to Paul Hellyer, who was a senior cabinet minister in various governments, and his latest book is called The Money Mafia. He's a World War II vet. Now, my understanding from him is that the Mackenzie King government nationalized, bought out all the private shareholders of Bank of Canada around 1937 or 38, and it was used as an engine to get out of the Depression, to relieve some of the provinces of their debt and bankruptcy, and to finance the war. And then after the war, they financed capital projects, the St. Lawrence Seaway, Trans-Canada Highway, and that made it possible to have a rather interesting, very good public health system.
Well, that was the Bank of Canada's original purpose, and its charter was to provide interest-free loans for development. But starting in 1974, the Canadian government said, we're not going to avail ourselves of the mandated interest-free loans. We're going to borrow the money we need from banks at interest, and you, the Canadian people, will pay the interest on it for in perpetuity.
That's right, exactly, yeah. And that's a big secret up here. Like, there definitely is a news box. And I was appalled to hear about interfering with Internet access. But anyway, because they were concerned we could lose that under these trade deals, that the private banks could possibly sue, that the government would have unfair competition if they use that vehicle. But it's really quite astonishing that you have to listen to American programs, which I like to do anyway, to find out what's really going on up here.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the government has literally ordered, the Canadian government has ordered the Canadian media, they are not to talk about this at all. They're trying to figure out some way they can derail this, because so far this has gone all the way up to the Canadian Supreme Court, and the justices are looking at it and saying, yeah, these guys are right. You know, and it isn't just the fact of returning infrastructure development to interest-free loans. It's the fact that the Canadian government, if not the Bank of Canada, or whoever those banks were that they went to get those interest-bearing loans, you know, owes the Canadian people a huge refund. But these bankers right now are standing very much exposed, and that's what they're really afraid of, that the people of the world are waking up to what's been going on for the last 300 years.
Yeah, well, the previous government of Bank Canada went from Goldman Sachs to governor of the Bank of Canada, then on to the governor of the Bank of England, and the Bank of Canada governor in the early 80s that helped wreck our economy. I guess the international bankers liked him. They made him chairman of the Bank for International Settlement. So where does the Canadian public interest come in all this, I'm wondering?
It doesn't seem to come in there at all, but we got the same deal down here in the United States, and the people of the world need to understand this. We're coming up on a break here. Let me finish this. The people of the world need to understand this. Private central banks do not exist to serve the nation and its people. They serve themselves, and they should not be given control of the public currency because they use it to make themselves richer and you poorer. That's why we've had courageous leaders like Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, who tried to stop this. And the bankers were perfectly willing to kill a president of the United States of America to continue their greedy games. Bernard, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and hopefully Bernard will get himself a better telephone before he calls in again. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we've been talking about the encroaching dictatorship on the Internet. And as is all too often the habit with this government, they will punish the behavior of a few isolated wrongdoers by wrecking everything for the rest of us who are playing by the rules. So, story out of Refreshing News 99. Go to prison for sharing files. That's what Hollywood wants in the secret Trans-Pacific Partnership deal. Now, content piracy is wrong, okay? If you really like the music or the movie or the book, just buy it. These days, to be very honest, there aren't new movies out there that are worth stealing anyway. And much of what passes for modern rock music may cloak itself in the sounds of the 60s and 70s, but they certainly lack the social commentary. But apparently, they're talking about changing the copyright laws to life of the author plus 70 years. Now, the original purpose of copyright and patent was to grant somebody who put in the work to write a work or build a device the opportunity to make money off of it. And after that, it would pass into the public domain to enrich society as a whole. Well, then along came the Disney organization, which was looking at the existing copyright laws and realizing that Mickey Mouse was about to become a public domain character that anybody could build on, just the way that today anybody can build on the characters of Hercules or Jason and the Argonauts or anything that's been around for a very, very long time. So Disney literally lobbied the U.S. Congress to change copyright so that it extended past the lifetime of the creator in order to grant the corporations an exclusive license to just carry that character into the future, that property into the future. And that's kind of a gray area because, there certainly was a vested corporate interest in Disney maintaining control over their characters. But now they want to make it basically universal so that not only does the original creator of the content profit from it, but their heirs and assigns and whoever they sell it to can just keep on doing it. And at some point, we cross a line between protecting the financial interests of that original creator and so constricting society that there's virtually no intellectual property out there that ordinary citizens have a right to use anymore. And I think that's a tremendous loss. So, that's very much up in debate. Now, the TPP is in trouble. And it's run into a brick wall because there's also in there a demand by the U.S. government on behalf of agribusiness to ban GMO labeling in every nation that is signing the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And that's a problem because a lot of those nations already mandate GMO labeling, like Japan does. And that would be a serious loss of governmental face to reverse themselves by signing that treaty. And I think the American negotiators are misjudging their Japanese counterparts because even in the 21st century, saving a face is still very important in the Japanese culture. Meanwhile, down in South Carolina, they've declared it a felony for prisoners in jail to look at Facebook, punishable by solitary confinement. It's now a level 1 felony for using a social network while in prison. I'm not entirely sure why they felt that that was necessary. Anyway. Now, here's a video we just put up at whatreallyhappened.com. And it was posted about a week ago. FEMA activates the clergy response teams. And this video is a montage of all these commercial TV Bible bangers reinforcing the message that your leaders were put into where they are by God, and you should just submit to their authority without question, or you will not get into heaven when you die. I mean, if they're desperate enough to try and bring back rule by divine right, you know, anything that works, anything that keeps the power and the wealth in their hands, they're going to do. You remember those ludicrous photos that started in the Bush administration, and even Obama did it a couple of times, where they've got their head and behind it is the seal of the president blurred. Looks like one of those old medieval or Renaissance icon paintings of the saints. And it was laughable that they're trying to out there, and even Bush said, you know, that he was on a holy mission to go into Iraq. Now, all of these organized religions enjoy generous tax breaks from the government as long as they do what they're told. And remember, under Bush, the faith-based initiatives, where the government was handing out tons of money to churches to take over responsibility for social programs that had been handled by the civil governments before. And so all those heads of churches who got rich on that, well, they're beholden to the federal government, which explains this video montage. We've been talking about the gun laws and how ridiculous they are getting in this country. Apparently, there's this story out here in Telehub where anybody who's accused of domestic violence will lose their Second Amendment rights. They'll have to turn in their guns. Oh, the neighbor thinks you were slapping your wife around. Your guns are now confiscated. They want to take guns away from veterans of the wars because they're all mentally ill. Now, we've been saying here that I think everybody at age 12, you know, if they're mentally competent, obviously we don't want to do this with children who are born with deficiencies, but any normal human, age 12, get them a gun, take them to a gun safety course. Teach them the safe handling of a firearm, demystify it. Let them learn up front. This is not a toy. It is a tool to get the varmints out of your garden, to get the criminals out of your living room, or your government. Senator Feinstein's now come out the opposite way. She doesn't think women should be taught to shoot. Senator Feinstein, who, by the way, carries a gun, has come out saying women aren't capable of defending themselves with guns. I'd like to put Senator Feinstein up against the lovely lady Claire, because Claire's a crack shot. She hits what she aims at here. And this is even more bizarre. Over in New Jersey, a retired teacher is facing felony charges under New Jersey's ridiculous gun laws because the police found a gun in his car, a Revolutionary-era flintlock pistol. And they've arrested him. He's looking at years in jail for having a gun in his car without whatever they're requiring to do. Boy, is it obvious they are terrified of you? We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm looking at an image somebody just mailed me, the front cover of the current edition of The Economist magazine. And the banner headline is Putin's War on the West. And they've got a picture of Putin looking serious with a hand in front with strings coming off of it. Boy, they are laying on the bovine excrement with a howitzer these days. Putin didn't do anything. In fact, Putin's just kicking back and laughing at how the U.S. is self-destructing with all this nonsense here. We have been talking about problems with police, civil forfeiture, corruption, the rest of it. And here's a very interesting story out of Aletho News. This happened over in Great Britain. And it's basically talking about this case that happened back in 2002 that put a grandmother on death row on the basis of statements made by witnesses that they had seen this woman kill somebody. Well, now these key witnesses have come forward and filed sworn affidavits in which they are admitting they lied on the stand because the prosecutors had threatened them. And one of them was saying that he was already in trouble for his own crime. And the prosecutor said, if you don't help us get the death penalty for this woman, Linda Carty, we'll make sure you get the death penalty. Stories like this are why, all jokes about tar and feathers and guillotines aside, I cannot support a death penalty. Because our justice system is not just. At the very least, it makes horrendous mistakes. At the very worst, people are wrongfully convicted and sentenced for political gain. Leonard Peltier being a good classic example. We know people are wrongfully executed for crimes they did not commit. Bruno Richard Hauptmann being textbook case. So until we can give life back to those it is wrongfully taken from, we shouldn't take it in the first place. Now then, on to the subject of human-caused global warming. Boy, what a weekend. I got family in New England. I was trading emails with them, and they were sending me pictures. Looks like scenes out of The Day After Tomorrow, this science fiction movie about how global warming was going to cause intense freezing, which is nonsense. I used to get into these huge scientific debates with the film's producers saying, this is not how it works. Let's see, stories out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. As cold as the polar vortex. New York City plunges to 4 degrees Fahrenheit, freezing cold. Boston reaches its snowiest month on record, and more is on the way. Over at governmentslaves.info, they're calling these storms biblical. Punishing New England. What did we do? Now, this last one was called Storm Octavia. It was thunder snow, which is not common. Apparently, the entire Ohio River is now iced over in Greenup County, Kentucky. Just solid ice there. Delaware breaks their record low temperature. They've got 8 inches more snow forecast for tonight, and there's another storm coming in middle of the week. Let's see, Buffalo hit their coldest temperature since 1996. And the global warming enthusiasts are out there saying, well, you know, all those 19th century records, they're still there. See, the world is getting warmer. Even as cold as it is, it was warmer than it was in the 19th century. Well, in the 19th century, you didn't have as much of the urban heat island effect to offset things. Apparently, there was only 1 hour yesterday where the temperature got above zero in the entire day here. Let's see. UPI, winter storm sweeps east as Boston reels from record snows. Last week's storm broke 2 records in Boston. The National Weather Service tweeted that February 2015 was the city's snowiest month on record, and the month is only half over. And it's taking its toll. There's this very sad story coming out of Daily Mail in Great Britain. 66-year-old woman in New Jersey was over at a neighbor's house. They were drinking, and she left to return to her own townhouse just 2 doors down, didn't make it, froze to death. Another story here where apparently they found a man on the Coney Island boardwalk who seems to have frozen to death. And not mentioned in any of this is what's happening with all the homeless people in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. What's happening to them? Is it the big, deep, dark secret, the way we get rid of the homeless, we're going to let them freeze to death? When the spring thaw finally hits, we'll mulch them up. Use them as fertilizer or something. Nobody's talking about that, what's happening to these homeless people, who were made homeless not through any fault of their own, but because of the greed of the money junkies. And freezing to death is not a pleasant way to go. Grand Rapids cold breaks 52-year-old record, and worse is coming. It's going back to 1904. And remember, 10 years ago, what were the Carbonazis telling us? Snowfalls are now a thing of the past. Remember the UK Met Office's embarrassment in 2009, where they predicted a snow-free winter for Great Britain, and it turned out to be one of the worst whiteouts they'd ever had. But Al Gore said it was going to be warm. The Hadley CRU said it was going to be warm. Now, here's a rather interesting little story. This is out of the National Geographic, acknowledging that as the world gets cooler, the Sahara Desert is shrinking because there's now increased rainfall happening around the edges of the Sahara, and it's starting to green up and turn back to usable farmland. Sounds like a good thing to me. Now, here's a really cool story. This is out of NoTrickZone.com. We've been talking about all these green projects that were started up by political cronies and given generous U.S. taxpayer support because we're going to save the planet from human-caused global warming. Apparently, over in Germany, their report card for wind power for last year is in. They have 25,000 wind turbines. And this giant network of wind farms only produced 14.8% of its rated capacity. The technology isn't very good. We're hearing about the manufacturers of these turbines and rotors didn't build them all that well. They're already coming apart. Rotor fires are becoming almost a joke. These things exploding. It was just a money-making, get-rich-quick scheme here. All righty, we're coming up here on another break. I got a few seconds. I'm going to fit this one in. Apparently, after years of being told that butter and eggs and fatty meats were bad for us, they're finally backing off and saying, well, actually, I'll tell you when you get back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Our last segment of the program today on this Monday, President's Day, and I've decided I want to go into this story that I was teasing before the commercial break here because it offers an insight into how things get done in the United States of America. Now, if you're my age, you will remember a time where breakfast was things like, butter, eggs, sausage, stuff that came right out of an animal. Okay. But starting in the 1950s, there was research done by an American dietitian called Ansel Keys, which seemed to suggest that better health was achieved through a Mediterranean diet, high on olive oil, low on saturated animal fats. And of course, this new revelation was seized on by the minions of the nanny state as justification to tell you what you should eat, which has reached its nadir with Michelle Obama deciding for you what your children will eat at lunch in school, which has now been photographed infested with insects, I might add. Now, this research was also seized on by the producers of food that didn't come out of animals. And you were lured into stores and you bought things like, I can't believe it's not butter, and all these low-fat products, low-fat yogurt, low-fat everything else. And they replace the fat with chemicals out of a chemical factory, some of which have their own issues. And along with that, of course, were the sugar and corn syrup industries, because fat is what gives food flavor. And when they took the fat out, in order to make their products palatable, they would add sugar in, which is far worse for you than the fats. And this has gone on for half a century before they finally understood that the original research was deeply flawed. And now, after they've made all the money and they've sold you all their chemical products and they've made Americans unhealthy with all the sugar and corn syrup, they're saying, well, I guess butter's really okay for you anyway. But it was all driven by the money. See, here's something you need to remember. Humans have co-evolved with the other life on this planet for millions of years. We have eaten the eggs of birds, the meat of animals, their dairy products. Our body's biochemistry knows that biochemistry. Our bodies are not evolved to be able to process all this synthetic chemical stuff. But the synthetic chemical stuff is profitable because it's patented and it's market exclusive. And what we're seeing here in this story is the admission that for the last 50 years, the dietary information being given to you by the government and by corporate media was not valid. It wasn't what was best for you. It was what was best for the corporations that wanted you to stop buying butter and buy their synthetic yellow Wizzo stuff. And you need to remember, margarine was actually invented as a wartime necessity during World War II, when the American troops were fighting in Europe in those horrible winters. They needed all the fats they could get in their diet. That's where all the butter and everything was going. And because there wasn't anything left in the United States, at least below the 1%, they came up with this concoction, this white greasy substance. It would come in a bag with a little capsule filled with yellow food color. You'd break the capsule and you'd knead it so it would sort of look like butter. And after the war was over, they said, well, we've got to figure out a way to go on selling this to the American people because we're making money. We don't want them going back to butter. Ooh, butter is bad for you. Eggs are bad for you. And overall, Americans' health has deteriorated, much to the joy of the medical industrial complex. Because every time they tinker with the food to take out something for an advertising purpose, what they put back in is actually worse. And I wonder how long it's going to take for them to finally acknowledge that this human-caused global warming nonsense was precisely that. Now, as vaccine uptake reaches all-time lows, public health policy now shifts to mandatory enforcement and criminalization to those refusing vaccines. You will buy our chemicals. You will stick them in your arms. By the way, apparently McDonald's is giving free vaccines with Happy Meals in Texas, which is not going to help their sales. Apparently McDonald's sales are plummeting rather rapidly. And there are two factors. This article I'm looking at, Americans are rejecting the fake fast food ingredients. You'd be amazed what's actually in what they call beef. It's not all cow, I'll tell you that right now. The other part of it is McDonald's has become so expensive, it's not the cheap alternative anymore. It's costing as much as any other restaurant, and why would you go to a McDonald's and spend that kind of money and get food that's really not all that good for you? All right, a couple of quick stories about computer stuff. Kaspersky, which is over in Russia, they're one of the best computer security companies that are out there. They have discovered that the NSA has backdoors hidden in physical hard drives made by Western Digital, Seagate, Toshiba, and other top manufacturers. They can go right through the hardware and read your hard drive regardless of what software you have on there, unless you are encrypting your files, and then they are out of luck. And apparently Kaspersky has always tracked down these so-called omnipotent hackers, the ones behind Stuxnet and Flame, and confirmed that they seem to be linked to the NSA. And apparently these attackers are known as the Equation Group. And they were identified because some of their other products and offerings they put out there include code that later turned up in Flame and Stuxnet and Dooku and Gauss. So it's a interesting bit of forensic work in determining just where these things are coming from. And remember what I said earlier in the show? Maybe it's the NSA behind all this hacking and cybercrime to scare you into going along with Obama's cybersecurity. Or just because, they're criminals to begin with. They're certainly not in compliance with the Constitution. And they're just going to make some money off of you. Because that's all you're good for in the eyes of the New World Order. You're there for the elites to make more money off of you by hook or by crook. By the way, apparently Microsoft's latest patch, KB302-3607, has broken a popular Cisco VPN client. It's rather alarming how many of these patches come out from Microsoft that are causing damage, and frankly, I think at this point, security or not, it's time to turn off the automatic updates on all your machines. Because they're breaking a lot of stuff here. GM ignition switch death toll rises to 56 people. Can't even make an ignition switch for a car anymore that's reliable. No wonder they've got all those protection laws. You can't bring other people's cars in here. They might set a bad example. By the way, if you've never seen it, there's this wonderful movie, Tucker, A Man in His Dream, and it's about the Tucker torpedo. And if you are a car fan, you know what I'm talking about. And if you are not, hunt this movie down on Netflix. It'll give you another insight into how government and corporations really behave. Because it's a horrible, horrible story here. Let's see, 17 more St. Paul and Minneapolis Catholic priests accused of sex abuse. And apparently over in Washington, D.C., Rabbi Barry Frundell has been arrested for installing a hidden TV camera in the mikveh at the synagogue. The mikveh is the ritual bath that you're supposed to cleanse yourself before you come into the synagogue, and apparently was making videos of all the naked women. Amazing here. Let's see. Rabbi Meir Klaugant, Australia's most senior rabbi, resigns after testimony at the Royal Commission looking into sex abuse. But as long as they're out there telling you to submit to the will of God, nothing's bad's going to happen to them. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get some animation work done. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Please support Genesis Communication, support whatreallyhappened.com, share what you know with everyone you know. We're really on the brink in terms of stopping World War III. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.